Efecto Butterfly.
Thank you. We are really glad for this interview, for this little moment.
Yeah, thank you.
We enjoyed very much your speech on Tuesday.
Great, thank you.
We have from Efecto Butterfly, is our program. We have some questions about your work and about your speech.
Sure.
The first is self-talking in third person can attenuate the neural makers of negative emotion processing.
It decreases them, yeah?
Why?
Why? Well, the idea is that we usually talk in the third person, or we use names to refer to other people. So if I say Jason to myself, it's as if I'm talking about another Jason. And so usually I use I to refer to my own feelings, but as soon as I say Jason, it creates just a little bit of distance where my brain and my body kind of think about my feelings and thoughts as if I'm thinking about somebody else. So it's like I'm giving advice to someone else because I'm using a name, which we usually do, to talk about other people. So we wanted to use this really subtle difference because lots of people do it in everyday life. We kind of all know a boss or some annoying friend of ours who might talk about themselves in the third person. Athletes do this a lot too. Actors, famous people talk about themselves in the third person. So we saw that it was something that people did automatically. And we figured there has to be some reason people do that. And so we thought the reason they did that was to create some distance on their own experience so that they could feel a little better about it and get a little better perspective on it so that they didn't have to get so emotional. And so we thought we could do the same thing in neuroscience testing with basic emotional stimuli as well as people's memories about past hurtful experiences. And we figured that if we just asked them to think about the experience or the picture they're looking at and use their own name, that just like people do in everyday life, they should feel a little distance and feel less negative about the experience, be less worried about it.
Writing about our emotions when we are in a state of anxiety can help us to attenuate, to lower this state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so writing about experiences, usually people would write about their traumatic experiences in the past. And they'd say, I had a really bad thing happen to me, and you write it out all on paper, and you start to feel better about that experience. The more you get it out on paper, you kind of evaluate why that situation happened, and then you can move on. But we started looking at why would that help for things that are in the future. And some people have started to do this where I would say, I'm really anxious anticipating this interview. I could have sat outside and written all my worries and concerns about having this interview. And maybe by doing that, we could get all of our worries out on paper and kind of move them aside and throw them away so that I could be here with you and not be so anxious.
In another work that you made about, mention the evidence about intellectuality, humility of children.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell something about this?
Yeah, sure. In another line of work, like you mentioned,
yes,
we have looked at intellectual humility, and intellectual humility is a characteristic that we're interested in about how people think about their own intelligence. Do you think you are really, really smart, or are you worried that you're not so smart and you might be unintelligent and you're really cautious? And so, you can think about these things as be really arrogant, people who are really arrogant and think a lot of themselves, or people who are more conservative and more humble. And we generally think people who are more humble do better and are much better to interact with as friends or family members or coworkers or bosses. And so we're looking at how we can measure humbleness versus kind of arrogance in little children, even starting between ages of 6 and 8, to see if we can identify some cognitive and emotional as well as some brain mechanisms that tell us about how these little kids look who are humble or really arrogant about their own knowledge. And we've only started to really look at the data, but there are some very interesting things that we've been finding about. It's actually the kids who are not that intelligent on IQ tests who think they're really smart. So there are some of these paradoxes and these differences where we're really trying to see what makes a humble or an arrogant child, and we're also looking at their parents, and we're saying, what do the parents do? And how humble or arrogant are their parents? And there are some funny effects we're seeing there too, where we have intellectually humble parents, but we have intellectually arrogant children. And so we're really trying to figure out what are the relationships and what are the neural mechanisms of what makes somebody think they know a lot versus what makes somebody a little more humble and a little more cautious.
And these affect their abilities of children and their life.
This is the idea. At least in adults, they've been looking at this a lot with who is humble or who is arrogant, and it does have effects on their ability to learn new things, to communicate, to kind of look back at their experience and say, well, maybe I should have changed what I did, been a little more cautious, brought in some new information, maybe thought differently about it. But people who are really intellectually arrogant and think they know everything about it, they're not as willing to listen to you or get new information to change the way that they think. And so we're really kind of thinking at intellectual humble child and an intellectual humble adult. They would be much more productive in society and much more social and
social mind and social
social emotional and this social mind, social cognition. They'd be better at kind of taking the perspective of other people and changing their thinking based on different perspectives. And that's what is really at the root of collaborative and interdependent harmony, is for us to be able to think about what might you think versus what I think, and we should come in a middle ground. And I shouldn't just reject what you have to say because I think I know everything already.
This is a harmony community.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very, very much for your valuable time. We are really glad to interview.
Thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Efecto Butterfly.